I set very specific and clear expectations of how we're going to treat one another. And so not only am I promoting an idea of, these big concepts of how we're going to care about each other, we're going to respect one another. I don't have a problem saying we're going to love each other. And me as a leader, I'm going to love you. That's a part of who I am. If you're on this team, I'm going to want, and what I define that as, I'm going to want to do what's best for you. I want what's best for your family, what's best for your life.
Welcome to the Tip the Scales podcast, where we discuss running and growing your law firm. I'm your host, Maria Monroy, president and co-founder of LawRing. If my voice sounds different, it's because it is. I've been at a conference recording podcasts. I had some speaking engagements, and we've been in really loud environments where we have to scream to be heard. I also wanted to add that I'm going to be doing a solo episode where I focus on the local component of SEO. Just talking about Google My Business. It's now called Google Business Profile. If you guys have any questions regarding local SEO, please either shoot me a DM on Instagram, Maria LawRing, or at tipthescales.podcast, or leave a comment on our YouTube channel so that I can answer your questions during this episode that I'm going to do for you guys, because I get a ton of questions asked all the time. Today, I am joined by Bill Biggs. I've had a couple of people tell me that I needed to bring Bill on this podcast, and we talked about culture. Culture has become such a buzzword that it's really hard to grasp the concept of what does that even mean. He touched on the 3 things that really, really impact culture, and I really think you guys are going to enjoy this episode. Bill Biggs.
Maria Monroy.
Finally, we got to do this.
Yeah.
I'm so excited.
Why have we waited this long?
You wouldn't
I'm
do
evasive.
This with me.
I am evasive. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm an introvert. I'm scared of people.
I mean, actually, when I asked you, you said yes.
Yeah.
You never said no.
Is it possible I'd had a drink?
Maybe, yes, probably.
Yeah. I think it was Arizona, right?
All right. So you're known for culture. That's what
they say.
For. And I kind of want to talk about, I have a question for you, actually, before we get super into it. How much does culture have to do with like a management style? And could those 2 things be confused?
I think people probably wrap in the idea of management style into culture. I think that's probably relatively common. And so could there be some confusion there? Yes. From my perspective and culture, that whole concept, that whole idea, that's the stuff that I geek out to. I'm not a lawyer. I don't take depots. I don't cross-examine. I don't build cases. Those folks, those men and women who are phenomenal lawyers, whether they be trial lawyers or pre-litigation lawyers, they are obsessing and learning and always wanting to get better at their craft and understand the nuances of what it means to be a zealous advocate. I feel the same way about culture.
A, how did you get started in this? And B, how did you end up in the legal space?
I think it was always naturally in me. I didn't know what I wanted to be when I grew up until I was 40. These certain things that when I do them, I seem to do pretty well. Over time, you start to figure out what you're good at, what you're not good at in life, what comes naturally to you. And over time, I started to realize, regardless of what role or job I was in early in life, because I did a few things. I was a coach, I was a teacher, I got into media, but I always found that the things I loved the most and that I seemed to be fruitful at, productive at when I was doing them, was helping another person get where they wanted to get in life, like help that person be more successful. And then on top of that, I also loved seeing a group of people that if I could help play some small part in them being successful individually, then putting them together on a team and seeing great success for that team that has a common vision, a shared goal, they're in alignment with one another, they enjoy doing whatever it is they're doing, and they're driven to reach a goal, to beat a competitor, to get somewhere that they hadn't been before. That, over time, I could tell I loved it. Like that exhilarated me. So that could be when I was my kid's soccer coach. That could be when I was a teacher in a classroom. That could be in a business setting. There's so many places where helping someone else be successful individually, and then saying, if we can do that with multiple people, put a group of people together for a goal, and they love doing it, they love being a part of that team, that's deeply satisfying to me.
But how do you teach that? Because I mean, that sounds great, but like teach a business owner to do that, and that's very difficult, right? It's like asking Messi, hey, teach me how to be as good as you. It's like, yeah, right.
There are some things, right, that come natural to people and some things that don't. For me, understanding kind of how an individual works, how to bring out the best performance in a person, that starts with knowing them, with getting to know that individual. I think that starts with a deep sense of human dignity, of human worth, the value of each individual. And for me, that's kind of the value system that I was raised with, about how valuable people were. And so you build on that, an enjoyment of getting to know them. And so I value human beings. I enjoy getting to know them. I like meeting new people. I'm intrigued by people. I'm a people watcher. I like to go out and watch what people are doing. And then I start to say, well, I want to have some kind of purpose in my life. I want to contribute to the world. I say, all right, if I'm good with people, I get to know them easily. If I can help them and put some purpose to these things that come natural to me, then maybe I can, maybe I found my purpose. And so I went to school, got my bachelor's and master's in psychology. So some of my first work professionally was in counseling psychology, working as a therapist, working with couples, working with families, working with groups.
But how did you get to work with law firms, and what is it specifically that you do for them? Because I keep hearing you're like the culture guy, but what does that mean?
I had a mutual friend that was, at the time, I had started a media business working with professional athletes and professional sports teams, college sports teams, in public relations and performance enhancement for teams, and getting team chemistry on a football team or on a college basketball team. I was doing stuff like that and loved it. I had a mutual friend who worked for a law firm. That law firm was looking for a chief operating officer, but they were a relatively small law firm, about $2.5–3 million in revenue, 25 people. So they reached out to me through this mutual friend, and he asked, hey, are you interested in talking to these guys about their law firm? And I said, I know nothing about law. I mean, I really don't. And at the time, it was a new idea kind of out there. There were a few forerunners in the business or in this industry of non-lawyers who would come in and become COOs or director of operations. And there were a few firms that were trying it out with great success. And this firm was interested in trying that. We talked, we got to know each other, our values were aligned, and what they were looking for was somebody to come in and lead the team. Not just practice law, but they were growing. They were hitting about that 30-person mark, which a lot of firms find at that mark that things start to get kind of squirrely, kind of out of hand. The management, the leadership, you don't know what everybody's doing. It's all been kind of one department, and now you're starting to segment into different departments. That wasn't their forte. And so they said, we need somebody who's got a track record of organizational success and enjoys coaching people and coaching teams in a business context.
Now, what you're alluding to is like having the processes in place to scale, basically.
Yep.
Do you think that impacts culture? Meaning if a firm or any business grows too quickly and they don't have those processes in place, is that going to impact the culture of the team?
Absolutely.
And why is that?
Well, so let's start with the premise, and I believe this foundationally, that whether you intend to or not, every organization, every family, every group of people is going to have a culture. And because the culture is the things that they kind of share, the things that they value. So you could wrap in, the buzzword of core values in there, but that manifests in what they believe and how they treat one another and how they act in things that are acceptable norms. Every organization starts to have those, whether they realize it or not. And it's driven most often by the leader, the founder, the entrepreneur. The culture starts to take on, in fact, many times I say, at the end of the day, culture is a person. And it's a person, what I mean by that, it's going to default your culture of any organization by default will at least start with kind of the basic values that are being manifested by the leader.
And at what point does the leader become irrelevant? Because I worked for AT&T for a really long time, and there was definitely a culture. You didn't really think of like a person.
I would say there's two ways in which that leader becomes irrelevant, and one of them is really good and one of them is really bad. They may become irrelevant because they're no longer having influence, or if they're having influence and it's negative, it's destructive, that's not good. I also believe that in a very positive way, a leader who has done such an intentional and strategic job and been good at it of infusing their values into the next set of leaders under them that they're pouring into, and they pick the right people, they infuse the right values, they train those leaders under them on how to multiply themselves, which is my favorite leadership book, Multipliers by Liz Wiseman. The idea is it's a trickle-down effect. It's a pyramid. That leader, in some sense, you might say, they almost make themselves irrelevant if they've done such a great job of giving their values to that next layer, because now that layer is no longer dependent on the leader above them to reinforce the values because they've bought into them themselves. And so in some ways, the idea of working yourself out of a job, and I often tell law firm owners that I've worked with, my job is to come in and give you the law firm that you want. And in many ways, that's often defined as, can you walk away from this firm and come back 6 months later and it looks like what you want it to look like values-wise? It's doing the right things, and it's probably even better than when you left it. If that's true, then you've done a phenomenal job of leading. If you've made yourself irrelevant so that you could walk away and come back and it's better than when you left it.
What's the first step? Like if a leader, an owner, whatever, it's like, okay, I don't really know that I've put any intention into what I want my culture to be.
Several years ago when I was asked to speak at a conference called LitaQuest, I had already been kind of known as the culture guy, but they asked me a really poignant question. They said, we want you to talk about culture from the stage, but we want you to talk about the practicalities of it. What is it really, and how can it be, what's the ROI? How can you make a company better, even the bottom line financially, by improving the culture? And that wanting to do well at that presentation really made me dig in to say, first I need to define this, because the idea of culture to me is, I always say, look, it is one of the most overused and least understood words in the industry. It's a buzzword. Everybody says culture. And I think that's, kind of negative now because it gets watered down. People don't take it as seriously. All right. Core values is another one. You hear it all the time. It's a buzzword. It's right.
Authenticity.
That's
right.
All those
one.
things. Disruption is becoming like that, right? There's these words that we use a lot, and then they get diluted, and they may still be wildly important, but because we say them all the time, they become stale. And culture is maybe at the top of the list. So what I set out to do was, I want to define to these people who I've got 42 minutes. I want to define what it is. So I went on a deep dive into sociology, into anthropology, and learning the people who study culture in its basic human state, with the way we understand it. How do they define it? What are they talking about? And when I got to that and started to see the parallels of how a sociologist or an anthropologist would define culture and start to apply that into business and organizations, and even more specifically into law firms, the overlap was incredible.
So what did you find?
Yeah. So what I found was it does start with the value system. Culture is what makes a group of people unique one from another. Language, belief systems, religion, traditions, rituals, how they get married, how they, whatever it is they do, all of those things, that's a part of their culture. We're here in Miami. There's a certain culture in Miami, right? And we can look at those things and identify those are what make Miami unique. That's what makes this culture of this community.
I mean, you know what they say? That it's the best city in Latin America, which is comical.
It was fascinating, right? So that is really a beautiful manifestation of culture. Well, every organization has the same thing. And to go back to your question of, an entrepreneur, they've started their firm, they're at 30 people, 25 people, whatever. Should they be thinking about culture? Is culture already happening, right? If they don't early on, if you don't as a law firm owner or any leader, if you're not intentional about taking a step back and saying, what is culture? What do I want it to be? And then how do I make that happen? Then there's still going to be some culture that happens, but it's not going to be by design. And I talk about this a lot as well. There needs to be intentionality and design. So now I'm going to get to the nuts and bolts of your question of what I've tried to simplify it down to. If there's a law firm owner, someone out there trying to figure out how do I build the right culture? To me, it comes down to three things, and we'll be specific to culture in a law firm. Number one, how strongly does everybody on your team believe in the purpose? So is there a deep sense of purpose in the work that you do, and that purpose is pervasive? And I call it saturation of belief. So in other words, do you really believe in helping your clients? Do you really believe that if you're a plaintiff's lawyer, that the deck is stacked against your client and you are the person who has the responsibility and the privilege to fight insurance companies, to fight to get justice for your client? And not only do you as the leader believe it, but does everybody on your team understand why they're there?
This is fascinating. Can I tell you why?
Why?
So I have a mindset coach, and a really big part of what he teaches is that everything that we do comes down to what we believe.
Yeah.
So the way that we act, every single thing, there's a belief behind it. And if you want to change the actions, you first have to get down to the belief. So this makes perfect intuitive sense to me.
That's cognitive behavioral therapy. What I believe first, to focus on that. If I can change my beliefs, I'll change my actions. There's also the flip of that. Some that believe it's behavioral heavy. Change your behavior and your beliefs will start to change. There's research that would say that some of that can, it goes both ways.
It definitely goes both ways, because I don't know if you've read, I think it was Atomic Habits that mentioned this, how the things you do become part of your personality, and it can actually go the other way too. Like if you start to say, I eat healthy, you'll start to eat healthy because you've been saying that you're, this healthy person. So when I was trying to cut back on drinking, I would start to say, oh, I don't drink much anymore, which was not necessarily true yet. But now it's become true that I'm
manifesting it.
Totally. Huh? And by this point, I'm not much of a drinker. And it becomes part of your personality. So you're more likely to act in line with your personality. And that makes sense, right? Like,
talk yourself into it.
Totally. Yeah. So I could see how it could go both ways.
And by the way, there's a great book. Everybody knows Simon Sinek. Start with why. Well, that's the same thing as purpose. So what I believe about culture deeply is that if to simplify it into its most basic elements, if you said, I really want to have great culture, but this still is all kind of confusing to me, and it seems like I could get lost in a rabbit hole of trying to understand what it all means, you boil it down to this. Everybody in your organization needs to understand their purpose and the purpose of why this organization exists. That's what I love about our industry, is that we have a noble purpose. We're helping people who have been harmed. So in my opinion, it's easy to grab onto that.
It's very easy.
And yet a lot of law firms miss out on that, and they don't inspire passion and cause and purpose in their teams. And even when they're bringing in people who aren't, maybe they're bringing in a legal assistant, they're going to train somebody to become a legal assistant or an intake associate, or, someone who didn't go to law school, whatever the case may be. People out there, especially of that age group, are looking for purpose. They're looking for, I want to do something and contribute something to the world. We have a great offering for them. So the first thing is purpose. And the way I measure it is as I mentioned before, what I call a saturation of belief, meaning how much do you believe in the purpose? I got 30 people in my organization. How saturated are every one of them in their understanding of purpose? And that responsibility falls on me as the leader to saturate, to constantly talk about it, to put it in front of them, to proselytize, right? To preach the gospel of purpose. All right. So that's the first one. The next one is...
Wait, before you go to the next one, what do you do if somebody clearly, I know the answer, but I want to hear from you. What do you do when someone just doesn't drink the Kool-Aid?
look, I understand there's challenges about, well, we don't have enough people, we're overloaded, we're all of this. And so we make reasons why we will keep people who don't have the qualities that we may deem to be absolutely necessary. I will tell you very practically, maybe you can still have a very strong organization and not everybody is as rah-rah and gung-ho about your purpose as you are. But I'll also say the more that level of saturation matches yours as the person who should be owning it, the better. So I think it matters a lot. And I think if you want to be great, then why would I keep someone? And by the way, it's not a rude or mean or cruel conversation to have with someone, especially if you give them what we might call a soft exit. If over time you sit down and have an honest, genuine conversation with them and say, you've been here for a year, you've been here however long, whatever, I just really don't sense that you believe this stuff as much as we do. And I think that's making me feel uncomfortable, and I think it's probably making you feel uncomfortable.
Well, it's not the right fit for them. So you're doing them a favor, in my opinion.
And I believe that. And I would tell you, interestingly enough, I think that is most common. Where I see that happen the most is when, again, specific to our industry, when plaintiffs' firms hire defense attorneys that are just looking for a job, wanting to make a little bit more money, whatever. And they think like defense attorneys. They still think about a case through the lens of what's wrong with it rather than aggressive advocating for their client. So sometimes a defense attorney can come to the plaintiff's side, and of course they'll all say, well, I know I know the tricks of the other side. I know the way we all do. You're probably not telling us anything new. Sorry. What I want to know is, do you really believe in what we're all about? Do you believe? Are you going to be hesitant to be as aggressive as we want to be on a case? And sometimes it's hard for defense attorneys to have that perspective. Not all the time. There's a lot of great defense attorneys that come and are fantastic plaintiffs' attorneys. But that goes to the purpose.
That makes perfect sense. What's number 2?
Right. Number 2 is, again, saturation of belief. How strongly, how deeply does everyone on the team believe in each other?
Believe in each other.
Believe in each other. Will we go to bat for one another?
How do you handle, like when I worked at AT&T, there was so much drama amongst employees. Like we're pretty remote right now, even though we do have some offices, but most of the time everybody works remote. So knock on wood, we just haven't dealt with that much. But law firms, they're in the office every single day, at least most. So how should law firms handle that?
Real quick, some firms that have had challenges with their culture, they have actually seen improvement with a remote model or hybrid model or pulsing model where more people are working from home.
Yeah, but I don't know that that's a solution, though.
It's not a solution.
That's like saying I'm going to separate, like one of my kids is going to live in one apartment and I'm going to go to, it's like, I mean, unless there's another reason for that, which there isn't, why would I do that?
I totally agree with you. But I do hear firms, and there is some truth to it when they say, since we've been remote or half remote or whatever, we've seen some of our culture problems subside. Well, that's probably true because the people aren't interacting.
Yeah, no, it makes perfect sense.
But you're also not seeing your culture get stronger. So it's becoming neutral. It's becoming maybe more bland. And in my opinion, that's negative.
You lose that personal touch and they've done studies on why people stay at a job. You probably know this. One of them is, do they have a best friend at work? So that that's like a known thing, right? Yep. When you're remote, you lose out on a lot of this. Like I don't with my team because I see my team at conferences, but the rest of the other 35 employees, they're primarily remote.
As we lay out the 3 things, we've already talked about the first one being purpose. Now we're talking about the second one being belief in each other. Purpose is probably the easiest one to instill because I think humans are prone to want to believe in something. We latch onto something. We take on we want an identity. And to me, that's a phenomenal thing because, we can inspire people to be on board with this purpose and this cause. So that one I actually think is pretty easy. You can go a long way if you are good at communicating it and you're clear about what you want. The hardest one of the three is belief in each other, because humans have a hard time getting along.
You almost have to be like a parent. I feel like the leader has to be almost like they have to instill that amongst each
100%.
other.
For me, this becomes the most important part of building a healthy organization, a powerful, elite level, highly successful organization. From my perspective, almost always it is a psychological and sociological endeavor.
So what are some things as a leader you should say to your team to make it clear that we're a team, we work together, and if you don't like that, like, bye?
I set very specific and clear expectations of how we're going to treat one another. And so not only am I promoting an idea of, these big concepts of how we're going to care about each other, we're going to respect one another. I don't have a problem saying we're going to love each other. And me as a leader, I'm going to love you. That's a part of who I am. If you're on this team, I'm going to want, and what I define that as, I'm going to want to do what's best for you. I want what's best for your family, what's best for your life. So I don't have a problem saying that. Those are concepts, right?
I would love to see how some lawyers react to this.
They have a hard time. It's soft skills. It's a little ooey gooey for them. But the next thing of that is, all right, and here's where it gets tough, but powerful is when you start to say, here's how we're going to treat one another, and here's how we're not going to treat one another. And these things, if you do these things, maybe there will be some coaching, maybe there will be, you might get a pass, you might get one strike or something like that. But I've said many times, and I hold to it and I believe it, culture performance is just as powerful, if not more, than task performance, in my belief about what makes a high-performing player, a high-performing team member. What do I mean by that? If you are constantly negative, if all you have is a negative comment, if you gripe about your team members, if you gripe about the leadership, if you gripe about the policies, if you're cynical about the purpose,
yep.
If you have that way about you and it's manifesting in clear and obvious ways, I want you out. And I may give you a chance. I want to talk to you and be open about the change I need to see. But we are going to set guidelines and rules about the way we behave and the way we don't. Some more of those things. And by the way, that culminates in what I call a social contract, where there are, and we probably don't have time to go into it too much here, but it is basically a set of things that we as a leadership team agree on about how we're going to treat one another and how we're going to deal with conflict. This is a fascinating piece. And then how we're going to treat the team.
Interesting.
And so and
it's actually written.
It is a written contract, and then everybody in the firm signs it. And I have told people over and over, I'm involved in the onboarding process for every person that I've ever hired.
How critical is onboarding?
Oh my gosh.
They say that the first 90 days are like the most critical?
The minus 14 days before the hire, and then the 60 days after are the most indicative of success. That's where success is determined. And what I mean by that is the interview process. What's going on to determine, is this person the right fit? And what are they learning from us during the interview?
Another episode. I want to do an episode on interviewing.
Look, I geek out to this stuff, so I'll talk your ear off.
It's just interesting to me to see some lawyers, some law firms, not everybody, but they really lack these concepts, right? And we had a situation where we had a team member that was in a leadership position, and they did an amazing job, but anybody rolling up to this person had an idea. They were very quick to shut it down. They were very negative about it. It had to be their way or the highway. And we were like, no. High performer, but was literally the culture of that pod was just not good anymore. And the moment you remove them, it's like you have a different team. It's like, oh my God, like you feel the energy automatically.
I referenced the book Multipliers, Liz Wiseman, my favorite leadership book. Her premise there is that there are some people in leadership who are multipliers. In other words, they make everyone around them better. They inspire, they pour in values, they train, they grow, and they reproduce other people that have the right qualities. And they bring out the best in people. The flip side of that is exactly what you just described, or one element of it called a diminisher. The person that may be brilliant.
But that's the problem, I think. The problem is when you say they're doing such a great job in this area, but they're ruining our culture. And I think some business owners might let it slide because they're a high performer. But I don't like to sacrifice the culture. And for me, personally, I think the culture of our organization is not just my team, but our clients.
Absolutely. Have you seen Simon Sinek's his matrix on culture and performance? I call it culture performance and task performance, and how people fit into what you just described is exactly what he does, and it's brilliant. If you want to do something fun, can the camera see this? We're going to make a little square here. Here's one axis. Here's another axis. Going this way, it's culture, right? So if you're way high on this scale on culture, you're a great attitude, you do everything right in the front of people, so you're a 10 over here. Up here is your performance, job, task, performance, right? So I've got performance over here, what we understand as performance, task performance, and I have culture down here. So we draw our quadrants, right? Well, a D is low culture and low performance, right?
Yep.
A C would be up here. They're really good at their job. I don't know if you can see.
Yep.
They're really good at their job, but their culture is low, right? Over here's A, high culture, high performance. And even in the top quadrant of the top quadrant, top right quadrant, is A plus, right? A 9 and a 9. And then over here's a B, high on culture, but mediocre to low on performance. Simon Sinek is the master of this, and what he would tell you is the most dangerous person, the most dangerous quadrant
is C.
C.
Yes, because they bring everybody's performance down.
You got it. Because they want the glory for themselves. They're actually threatened by others.
Yes.
They are undermining the values, the culture, but man, they're damn good at bringing in money, or they're damn good at closing a case or whatever. And so most law firm owners and most leaders get so transfixed, right?
This is my best employee.
I can't get rid of it. Like, yeah.
I disagree 1,000.
Right?
I agree.
And I've seen it over and over again that if they'll have the bravery, the courage to get rid of that person. And I do, most people would say, most of the experts on this stuff would say, it's almost impossible to get a C over to an A. If they're low on culture, it's very hard to get them over. Now, I think you can have some success depending on why they're low culture. But we won't get into all that. Most of the time, right? Most of the time it's hard, and you start to find it doesn't really work.
It doesn't work.
But,
in my experience, I've been managing for, like 18 years. My first management job, I was 18. I've never, ever seen it personally. I
always believe, and this may be a flaw in my leadership and management style. And by the way, those two things are different, and that'd be a fun topic to talk about, the difference between leadership and management. But in my style, I always want to give somebody an opportunity. So even if it's a culture problem, unless it's egregious, unless they've done something that's completely unacceptable.
No, and I think you should as a leader.
And you sit down and you say, you know what? I'm going to give everybody an opportunity to hear openly and clearly and kindly, but respectfully, but firmly and directly. Here is what can't happen again. This is not in alignment with who we are. And here's what I'd like to see differently. And how can I help you get there? If they can do it, then it's awesome. And in performance related things, a lot of times that works. In attitudes, in deeply held beliefs, in those culture stuff, right? It's harder for them to move to that. Yeah. So to circle back to point 2, belief in each other, the saturation of belief in each other, it absolutely should be, and every organization, in my opinion, every organization in America should have rules about how people treat one another. And why in the world would we say, and we do to some degree, we don't allow certain egregious acts to have discriminatory acts or harassing acts, but why do we allow the level of gossip that we do? Why do we allow the level
I don't allow it in my life. I don't think it's energetic. Like if you've read the 4 agreements, I think it's one of the most, and I love my family, my mom's side of the family that I grew up with. And it's very much a cultural in Mexico thing to gossip all the time. But I can't do it. And it's gotten to the point that I'm like, can we please I don't want to talk about other people.
I'm absolutely convinced, and I think there's good research out there to support this, but I've also just seen it anecdotally throughout my career. Interpersonal problems, emotional problems, inability for people to get along and function well together are the single biggest eroder. Is that they call that, those issues cause more loss of revenue, more pain on the bottom line, more collapse of companies than bad marketing plans. All those businesses out there that have a good idea, what typically leads them to either have stunted growth or to collapse is interpersonal problems.
That's crazy.
They can't function well together.
What's the third point?
All right. So third point is this. We've said saturation of purpose throughout the team, saturation of belief in one another.
You're such a teacher. I love how you recap them.
The third thing is saturation of belief about the client. And some people would attach this very closely and almost say that it's the same as number one, but it's not. You can have a sense of purpose that's not necessarily about the client, and it can still be a noble, righteous sense of purpose. But I'm talking about something that is deeply specific to the human beings that we serve.
And how we treat them.
And how we treat them. And I go farther than that because I think it ends up affecting how we treat them, how we talk about them behind the scenes, how we even train our people and ourselves. And it starts with self-training to think about the people that give us jobs. So I full well understand, just like everybody else, right, that we deal in our industry with difficult clients. That are
imagine mine.
Yeah, you deal with lawyers and people like me all the time.
I love our clients. My clients are the best, though, but I picked them. I think that's why. Sadly,
it is rampant, in my opinion, and I hope it's getting better. If I leave one bit of legacy in my lifetime and my career and the opportunities that I get to talk about this stuff, if I can help organizations, specifically law firms, treat one another better and treat their clients better and have a deeper respect and sense of the worth of those individuals, and therefore those individuals have better lives, they're treated better, then I've accomplished, what I want to. We as a industry do not, in my opinion, have the high view of clients that we should. Because I've heard it in law firms across America where clients are not deeply respected. And look, in that context, respect doesn't always have to be earned. I'm talking about human respect, human dignity. And it also becomes a very lazy and easy out when problems are going on, we're not doing our jobs well, and then the clients get upset, and then we call the clients crazy or unreasonable or demanding or whatever. But most of the time when a client of a personal injury firm is angry, 9 times out of 10, it's because they're scared. They don't understand the process, and nobody's taken the time to really teach them and to explain to them what's going on. They've been traumatized. Their financial future is in jeopardy. They literally don't feel good. They're in pain.
Well, there was just a shooting at a law firm. Did you read about that?
Yes, I did. I mean, crazy stuff.
Right?
These things, right? When people,
not saying that was what happened.
To cut to the chase real quick, because I know we're short on time. I outlaw the phrase "crazy clients" in any law firm that I work with.
Why?
Because it affects how we think about the clients. It's an excuse.
But what if sometimes it's like legitimate?
95% of the time.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
It's not true.
No. I think you're right.
But the number of times that a lawyer, a paralegal team will blame a client and talk bad about the client behind the clients, but what that's doing, it's almost self-fulfilling prophecy. It's eroding the view of that client. And so now we've now put a filter on how we think about the client. And so it's confirmation bias. Then every time that client talks to us, then it's going to add to this negative thing. But how did it get that way? Because we didn't talk to the client. We haven't talked to the client in 6 months. We don't return their phone calls. We don't explain to them the process. We don't treat them well. They don't even know the name of their attorney. They think their paralegal is their attorney. We overload our attorneys and our paralegals with way too many cases, trying to play a numbers game and a volume game and all of that. And we're not giving these people who give us a living an actual high quality of service. So yes, they get upset. What I always tell my teams is, look, these people are not crazy. They're acting normally under the circumstances that we have given them. And it's our job to build that trust. Is there a small percentage? There's issues, serious issues, and that has to be—
and unrealistic expectations.
And by the way, just one more quick thing on that. I also tell my teams, look, I expect a high level of respect and care for the client. I will hold you to that, and we are not going to talk about clients negatively. It's just not going to happen, and no crazy clients. But I will not allow clients to abuse you. So I'm going to protect my team too. That's the balance of them. I tell them high expectations.
I've had to deal with that, yeah.
But I'm also not going to let you get abused. So if you have a client that's abusing you, immediately send them to me. I'm the CEO. I'm the COO. But it's coming directly to me, and I'll fire a client if they're mistreating or abusing one of our team members. But 9 times out of 10, very rarely have I ever had a situation where it couldn't be resolved. They just need to be heard.
It's so weird because literally yesterday, a client told me the story how he had a really upset client a few years back, an Uber driver, and they ended up getting into it, like literally like screaming match. And then like they kind of calmed down and like talked it out. And the guy has referred him like a gazillion cases. It's like he's been like my best client like ever. And like he's had a bunch of cases because he's an Uber driver.
Started with conflict.
It started with conflict. I'm a big believer that if there's conflict and you can resolve it, it creates some sort of a bond, I think.
There's a concept known as the working alliance between the counselor and the client. And much of it is based on the fact that you will go through conflict. There's going to be a time that you have to confront the client, as a therapist. How you get through those first major conflicts where you tell them something that they don't necessarily want to hear, there's some pain, there's misunderstanding. A skilled therapist, someone who works with people to see the best in people can skillfully work through that event and create what's known as the working alliance. And it will be even stronger after the conflict than it was before. And why do we call it a working alliance? Is because there's work being done together in alliance for a common purpose and goal.
Well, I think I would guess, and I don't know, I didn't study this, but there has to be like a safety element to it, because it's like, then you're like, oh, I can have conflict with this person and everything's going to be okay.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you so much for joining me today. This was really fun. I feel like I learned some stuff.
Anytime. Thank you so much. It was an honor to be here. Love what you guys are doing.
Thank you. Thank you so much to Bill for everything he shared with us today. If you found this story valuable, please share it with someone you want to see succeed. Subscribe so you never miss an episode, and leave a 5-star review. It goes a long way to help others discover the show.